Hello you guys, and welcome to Mr. and Mrs. Social Studies. I'm Sarah.
I'm Jake.
And today, let's talk about student growth.
Oh boy, I love growth, especially student growth.
I love growth.
Yeah, right?
But seriously though, student growth is something that can be obviously what we want as teachers, but it can be kind of tricky to measure, especially when there's pressure from your school district to make sure you're reaching certain benchmarks with your students. I know at my previous school there was a lot of pressure there.
Yeah, definitely mine too. I think just the most important thing that I always think about though, student growth, is that you can't really hurt students and stop them from growing unless you don't teach them at all. So they're going to grow. So the way I think about this is it's just another mandate from, I don't know,
maybe
how
for
many
your
states,
state
a lot of
or
states
from
and
your
whatnot.
district.
I mean, you're gonna do it. It's gonna be fine. You just really more of a hassle than anything else. But if you're afraid, oh man, my students aren't growing, don't worry. They're growing, like I said, unless you're just not teaching them.
With the student growth, obviously too, there are certain things that you can do that might help your students grow more than others. We're not trying to ignore those. But I think that today we're gonna share what we have done for our student growth and the types of assessments we've done in our previous districts to give you a few pointers if you're struggling on what you should do. Since I know at least in the state of Illinois, it is a little bit confusing about what's allowed. It is gonna vary by states and districts, but maybe we can give some guidance on that today.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different ways that you can do this, so there's no right or wrong way. There's just a mandate, it has to be done, but it gives great flexibility to the schools to decide how to do it, which is both good and bad, depending on how you look at it.
Absolutely. So I'll first talk a little bit about my student growth experiences. My student growth activities were monitored for the past 2 years, and I had a starting point, a midpoint, and a final ending point. And what's great with these, the starting point is something that's given at the very start of the year. The midpoint is kind of a progress check. That is not necessarily, at least in Illinois, was not really required as much, but it was a good check-in in my district to show that I was working towards meeting the standards and helping my students achieve the growth that was desired. And then finally the ending point, which obviously happens towards the end of the year, and I will break those down a little bit. So for my classes, I chose my 7th grade US history class as the class I was monitoring for student growth. Obviously it's going to depend whatever you're teaching. We were able to choose which grade level we wanted to do, and I taught 6th through 9th, so I chose the 7th graders, and I needed 2 different assessments. So the ones that I chose were the Constitution unit as a whole. That's not necessarily something from the whole year, but it was a prime focus of the 7th grade year there. We had a pre-test that students were given at the start of the unit, as well as a post-test, which is the Constitution test that they're mandated to pass, as well as then a midpoint activity I use in the middle just to help see where students were. For my own formative assessment, as the unit is a big deal and I wanted to see where kids were at, but also to use as the midpoint on the actual student growth assessment. The second assessment that I did was DBQ writing, document-based question writing. We'll probably do a video about DBQs at some point, but I actually didn't create any of these myself, but there are some great DBQs on SHEG, Stanford History Education Group website, and I believe both of them came from there. And I did a DBQ exercise with them at the very beginning of the year. We did another DBQ around the middle of the year, and then at the end of the year, we did a DBQ. I believe the topics, we did Salem witch trials towards the beginning of the year. The midpoint was John Adams and the Alien and Sedition Acts, and then the end point was related to the causes of secession before the Civil War. So those were the ones I did, but it's going to depend on districts. Some people might use district assessments such as a STAR reading test or a math assessment, but since our district was smaller, I had a little bit more control in choosing what the options were.
Yeah, there's the type 1, type 2, type 3 different assessments on whatnot. It's very, very confusing. But how our district did it was completely different on how yours was. They had each teacher, because we were a small district too, most likely the only person who taught your particular grade level and subject. So I was the 6th grade social studies teacher for the entire district. And we were each responsible for creating our own assessment tools that were going to be used. You might think, well, there's some hypocrisy in that because you could easily fudge some results because you were the one who made the test, you were the one who graded the test. But ignoring that for a second here, we made pre-tests and post-tests. So similar to what you said, so I guess there's a similarity there. You created 2 tests that were supposed to be identical mirrors of each other. So they would be the exact same amount of questions. They would be the exact same difficulty level of questions. So you would have, for us, we had to create these essential skills, and this is before that we made the student growth tests. We had to create those as a department. So for me, 6 through 12 social studies, we had to all get together and make these essential skills. And then you were allowed to choose like 4 or 5 skills, and then you had to make a beginner question, an intermediate question, and then an advanced question for each of those skills. And then both the pre-test and the post-test were supposed to have those. And the idea is that you were going to see them from the pre-test, the post-test, before you taught them anything at the beginning of the year, giving that to them within like the first couple weeks, to then giving them the post-test the last couple weeks. The idea is that, well, voila, you're going to see growth, which, I mean, anyone could tell you you're going to see that, because if they haven't learned it before and then they do this at the end, they're going to learn. But the idea is also supposed to test skills more so than content knowledge, which for social studies I think is a little bit easier than I know others. I know math teachers got really frustrated with it because the skill was the content. I mean, they're intertwined. It's a little easier to separate that for social studies folk, but still, once they learn the content, they're automatically going to do better in showing the skill. I mean, it's pretty nice there. But yeah, the questions were different for both tests, but I mean, the content that was being covered was relatively the same. One of the questions was like Hammurabi's Code, and I just chose like different law for each like a question per test. Mm-hmm. So like they had to do the same thing, but it's just different laws they were doing with it, and like the same thing throughout.
Exactly, because you don't want to make it like, you know, you have the exact same test before and after, because it's like
easy.
I mean, that kind of feels like you're cheating a little bit. And I just want to, I know you're a humble person, so you're not gonna like this, but like his student growth test that he created was ridiculous. Like,
you're too
it's
nice.
No, but seriously, like, it's one of the best I've ever seen. I actually want to pull it up a little bit and share a couple of the questions just to show kind of the level, because that is a tricky part between the content and the skill part. You do want to focus more on the skills. I know with my 2 assessments, the balance is kind of like the Constitution's more so content. The DBQ writing response is more so the skills approach. So I felt like I kind of had it there between the 2, but I feel like you managed to capture all in one. And I was like, wow.
Oh, that was also it. We had the part with the essays we had to do too, at least for social studies. I think that was like our second one. It was like the department-wide like assessment, because we all used like the same rubric to grade writing prompts. So yeah, there was that in there too. So
I have pulled up the document, so I'll be reading a little bit off there, but just kind of giving you a sense of some of the type of questions that try to include both the skill and the content. So you did mention the Hammurabi one that you talked about so he's got excerpts of 2 laws from Hammurabi's Code, which since you do teach ancient world history, that's like one of the starting units you kind of do, looking at like the legal situation. First of all, he's asking about if it should be classified as a primary or secondary source. And then what can you conclude about Hammurabi's idea of justice based upon the 2 laws? And then create an argument that defends or challenges the fairness of these laws. You may only argue one side. Use evidence from the source to support your claims. Like in that just example there, I love, this is the pre-test by the way, but I love the idea that technically they are not required to have prior knowledge like into it. It's not like you're tricking them and being like, of course they're not gonna know any of this stuff. You're drawing upon those skills. Can they make conclusions from evidence and apply the evidence? But you're also connecting it to the curriculum, which I think is phenomenal. And then if we come over here to the post-test, and so then when we get to the post-test, he uses different sources. So students are still doing the same skill because that is what you are measuring, but it's new content, but then they hopefully also have the backstory now from the content you've done in class. So I just think this is amazing. They're like 10 and 12 page tests, so it's probably a good wake-up call when the kids are, now you're in middle school. Or I suppose it could work for older students too.
Yeah, I mean, they also told I actually don't know if I took this to heart too much, but it's supposed to be challenging. So the idea is they really bomb that pre-test, and then the post-test, I mean, they're just gonna automatically do a handful better because they actually know your expectations, and they've seen all that content now, so they're gonna be able to like, oh, we talked about this earlier in the year. So there's gonna be that blend there. It's kind of, I think, a little cheat sheet for you to help you out there. But I mean, you'll be surprised like at how it's just kind of like if anything else, if you have to do it, it's a good way to really validate to yourself like visible evidence there, which we already know is happening. But man, I'm having a tremendous impact on teaching these students for 9 months, and the message is getting across.
Well, I think it's valuable for them as well. Like, it's exciting for them to know that they're growing too, and especially like, when you first look at something like that's kind of hard, and then when you're going back at the end of the year and feeling much more accomplished because those questions now are much more manageable, in addition to having the backstory. I know something that I did. This wasn't any official student growth I had to collect, but for my geography students, we do something called GeoPower, and I'll make a video about this later on, but I basically put together a complete yearly plan of country flashcards, and students learned 5 countries every other week, and were quizzed on those, and we just kind of kept adding till we ended up with 80 countries that they knew. The first day of school, I gave them a blank world map, and I said, label as many countries as you can. And these were 6th grade students. I think about maybe 5 of them were able to label more than 10. Most of them, I think the average score was about 2 or 3 countries. They knew the US, and some of them knew Canada, some of them knew Mexico, some of them knew like Australia, but really it was stunning to me how little these students knew about countries. And then at the end of the year, it was really exciting because I did the same thing again, and now we had learned 80 countries. Not all kids got all 80, but the fact that all students had dramatic growth from what they did when they first started, it's just really exciting, and they felt so proud. Like, they were kind of laughing at themselves at the start of the year that they only knew like a handful. Like, they didn't realize at the start of the year that that was very low and not the greatest that they did that. And then at the end of the year, they were just really amazed by how much they had improved.
Yeah. Plus, I think the greatest testament to that is the following year you just asked them to like name a bunch of countries, and they still like mostly remembered. That's pretty awesome.
I'll get more into that resource a little bit later. But if you are an ancient world teacher and you need a pre-test and post-test for student growth, we will link Jake's test he made down below in the description. I would use it if I was teaching that subject, that's for sure.
You're too kind.
But let us know in the comments below what kind of assessments you have used for student growth, or maybe you haven't even needed student growth assessments thus far, and maybe you're more one of the lucky ones. If you enjoy teacher-related content, we're in the middle of our back-to-school countdown, posting a video every day until the school year starts for us, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
We'll see you
tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye.